Hey, it's Bilal, and this is Deep Sea, the podcast about seeing the world more deeply. On today's episode, I'm going to talk about football, and I know many of my listeners may not have any interest in football whatsoever, but I'll try to talk about some universal principles and lessons that we can learn from the game. Now, football followers or soccer followers will know that Liverpool recently won the Premiership title after 30 years of trying. I've been a lifelong fan, and it's been a tough few decades. Seeing the team in your early childhood winning everything, and then suddenly, for 30 years, them not winning anything whatsoever. Now, for Americans, this may not mean anything, and I try to find an analogy. Perhaps in American football, the San Francisco 49ers won the Super Bowl many times in the 1980s and the early 1990s, and then they stopped winning. So, being a Liverpool fan is a bit like being a San Francisco 49ers fan. You had a period of dominance and suddenly the success stops. Now, Liverpool have finally won the Premiership, but I'm not going to gloat over this. And I know many people who support other teams like Manchester United, Manchester City, Chelsea, have long despised the moment when Liverpool wins, mainly because of the fact that Liverpool fans would probably be the most irritating fans around if their team wins. So I won't do that. Instead, I thought I'd try to take some universal lessons away from this recent win for Liverpool. And I thought of 4 lessons one can take. The first one is that past success doesn't guarantee you future success. So if you imagine back in 1990, when Liverpool last won the league, they were the top dog. They had dominated the league over the 1970s and 1980s, and it looked like nothing could really stop them from winning the league constantly in the 1990s too. But it all stopped. Why was that? Well, there's lots of reasons for that. One was that in 1992, the league in England changed to what's called the Premiership, which suddenly brought in lots more money, and there were some changes in the rules around players being transferred between clubs. And so suddenly foreign players were allowed to play in the league much more than was the case before. And Liverpool really struggled to adapt to this new, much more commercial and much more open way of running a football club. Their arch rivals, or one of their arch rivals, I should say, Manchester United, instead embraced these changes and really raised the commercial game. They expanded their stadium, they bought lots of great players. Meanwhile, Liverpool weren't really able to adapt to these changes. So a lesson there is that success doesn't always last. And often when you're at your top of your game, it could really signal that there's only one way down for you. The second thing is that while we often think of sport as a very physical game, we can't remove the emotional side of the game, especially trauma. Followers of English football history will know that in 1989, there was a tragedy in a match between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest when they played in Hillsborough in Sheffield. Towards the end of the game, there was a crush of fans in the stadium where close to 100 people died. And the blame was put on Liverpool fans by the press and by the police, and this was a truly traumatic effect for the club and everyone around it. Kenny Dalglish, who was the manager of Liverpool, felt that he was a counsellor for all the grieving families. And he actually said when he stepped down as manager in the early 1990s that one of the reasons he stepped down as manager was simply because of the trauma of suffering from Hillsborough. It really did affect the club, the fans, and the city so much. As it happened, only later was Liverpool and their fans vindicated when there were inquiries which showed that if anybody was at fault for the crush of fans, it was the police. But nevertheless, what this tells you is that even in the most physical of games, we can't really ignore the emotional texture and underbelly of players, fans, and everyone associated with a club. The third lesson is that it takes a long time to change the culture of a club. So Liverpool, after 1990, their last win, they obviously tried to win for many seasons thereafter. But one of the things they really struggled with was to change their culture. After all, they had won so much for 10, 20 years. Every time somebody tried to innovate in some way, people would say that they were somehow going against the culture of the club, going against the memory of previous great managers. So even small things like one of the earlier managers in the 1990s saying that all players should have dental checks, that even was looked and frowned upon. Or changing the routine of players' fitness, again, people would say, would this have been something that the previous great managers would have done with the club? So it took a long time for the club to really upgrade all of its training, its facilities, and its way of thinking. What helped a lot was the introduction of foreign managers. So you had a manager called Gerard Houllier, a French manager who came to manage Liverpool in the late 1990s, who really started to bring the latest ways of managing and training teams to Liverpool. They also tried big money to try to get early wins in the 2000s, and that didn't really work. It was only really in the last 5 to 10 years under new ownership that they really started to go for a slow but steady approach of trying to win the Premiership. And the final lesson I would take is that winning the league for Liverpool wasn't due to just the manager, Jurgen Klopp, although many people do attribute him as a big reason for their success. It wasn't due just to their players. They have some star players like Mohamed Salah, Sadio Mane, and Van Dijk. It's really the whole club that had to raise their game, work together really well. As a result, it takes a whole club to really win. So in the case of Liverpool, you have Klopp, who's a very inspirational manager who knows how to change during a game. They've got really good players, of course, but their back office and the management are really impressive. So, for example, there's this whole staff and department that's devoted to identifying players for Liverpool to buy, headed by a chap called Michael Edwards. And that team has been really quite good at picking out hidden gems. So lots of Liverpool players, like even the high-profile ones like Mo Salah or Mane, when they were identified, many people didn't think they were the diamonds that they are today. But it was with astute identification of these players, then with good training and management by Klopp, that they were really able to turn into a fantastic team. So I'm not here to gloat. Instead, I'm just trying to understand some of the lessons we can learn from Liverpool winning the Premiership. 4 main lessons would be that past success doesn't guarantee future success. If anything, it could be a sign that you could be peaking. The second is you can never ignore the emotional underbelly of an organization, of yourself, especially if you've suffered a trauma. Third is that it takes a long time to change a successful culture. People will constantly try to go back to the old way of doing things, and that makes it much harder to adapt to the new reality. And finally, in order to win, every single department has to function at the highest level and work together really well. It's easy to focus on the people at the front, the star players, the manager, but it's really the back office, middle office, everybody that really matters. You need to get all the cogs working together in order for the machine to operate really well. We'll see how long Liverpool's success lasts, but as a Liverpool fan, hopefully the success will last a long time. Thanks for listening. Please tell a friend about the podcast. Leave a rating on iTunes, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever you go for your podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @BilalHafiz123. You can also follow me on Facebook, LinkedIn, or my blog, bilalhafiz.com. For my research work, you can go to macrohive.com. I'll be back soon, so tune in then.